Well, happy Epiphany, everyone. That is the scripture text that every single seminary student dreads, because what usually happens is the pastor at the church they grew up in doesn't want to preach on it, so they pawn it off on the seminary student. Because that's just how things work. The first time I preached at my home church, it was almost a text as rough. It was the beheading of John the Baptist. That's fun for a seminary student. But the slaughter of the holy innocents, that's the text that every seminary student gets to preach on at least once, because no one else wants to. And I think it's odd that while we celebrate the coming of the wise men on this Sunday, we can't forget the rest of the story with it. I mean, they're all connected. So the story begins with a star in the sky, a star that some Magi see. And now, Magi, they're probably Zoroastrian, which is a monotheistic religion coming from what is modern-day Iran, and they're probably priests because they're astrologers. So they see this star in the sky and say, oh, a new king is being born. So they go to the palace. That's where kings are born, after all. And they go to King Herod and they say, where is the newborn king of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east and we've come to honor him. Now for Herod, this presents a big problem because Herod didn't have any kids. Well, not any newborn kids anyways. Well, really, when it comes to Herod, he didn't have a whole lot of adult kids left either, because Herod was very jealous of his power. And so he used to always think that his sons were plotting against him to take his throne. And so he had 3 of them executed. Herod was a real piece of work. There's actually a Roman writer who wrote that when Augustine heard that Herod, king of the Jews, had ordered his own son to be killed, the emperor remarked, "It is better to be Herod's pig than Herod's son." Herod didn't abide any kind of threat to his power. So when these Magi come and say, where's the newborn king of the Jews? Herod, as this text said, was troubled. Now Herod is being a real special kind of jerk. When Herod is troubled, the entire city of Jerusalem was troubled along with him because nobody knew what he was going to do. The guy was, there was probably a lot going on with Herod that scholars have since tried to figure out, but long story short, the guy was paranoid. And you don't know when someone who's paranoid, you don't know what they're going to do, especially when they have the kind of power that Herod did. So he calls together all the experts in the scripture to find out, hey, if there's a threat to my power, I want to know about it. Where's the Messiah supposed to be born? And they say, oh, in this little town called Bethlehem. So why would Herod immediately jump to the conclusion that the Messiah was born? It just so happened that around this time, there were a lot of people who were claiming to be the Messiah who were going to lead the people of Israel from freedom from Rome and from King Herod. So there were a lot of people who were claiming to be the Messiah. So it makes sense that Herod would be like, okay, where's the Messiah coming from? Because if there's going to be a threat to my power, it's going to be someone who says they're the Messiah. So once he finds out where the Messiah is supposed to be born, he calls the Magi in again in secret, and he says, hey, tell me about when you heard about this star. Like, oh, a little bit ago, and we saw it, time enough to travel from Iran to Israel, and, said, okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to Bethlehem. And then when you get to Bethlehem, I want you to tell me if you find the child so that I can go worship him too. Spoiler alert, Herod did not want to worship this child. So the Magi go to Bethlehem. They follow the star there, and they see Jesus with his mother and with Joseph. And they give him these rather interesting and not helpful for a newborn baby kinds of gifts. Gold, gold's always useful. Frankincense, which smells, and myrrh, which I don't honestly think I know what myrrh is. Does anyone know what myrrh is? Because I don't. But, stuff that would be appropriate to give a king, but not really something appropriate for a baby who was born in a manger. But, they get a dream that says, don't go back to Herod. Herod's up to no good. They go back home to their own place from a different way. Joseph has a dream. It says, get out of town. Herod's coming for you. Because that's exactly what Herod did. Acting completely in character, Herod decides that he is going to kill every newborn in the area around Bethlehem from the time that the Magi said the star appeared until now. It might seem like a little bit of an overreaction, but when you're Herod, if you're willing to kill not one, not two, but 3 of your own sons because of you thought of a threat to your power, he wouldn't think anything of killing some babies that he has no connection to. That's just the kind of person that Herod was. After Herod's death of an illness that was described as Herod's evil, many writers of the time said that he died of a really ugly disease that was sufficient punishment for the ugly that he was in life. An angel appeared to Joseph again in Egypt and said, return to Israel. But Joseph had heard that Herod's son Archelaus, who was almost as bad as his father, ruled over Judea, so Joseph decided to settle in Galilee instead, in a little city called Nazareth. Now, there's a lot in this story to process, and there's a lot of directions that preachers tend to go with it. There's the most popular one, which is that it's Gentiles, Persian Magi, who first come and worship the baby Jesus. It's a reminder that while Jesus is Israel's Messiah, he doesn't just save one group of people, he's meant to save all people. There's also this aspect of Jesus being revealed to the whole world. In Luke, it says that he was revealed to some shepherds, but in this Matthew account, he's revealed being revealed to Gentiles, it is symbolic of him being revealed to the world. There's also some social justice-related aspects. There's Herod's callous slaughter of innocents as a reminder that we also should stand up to innocence. There's the Holy Family's flight from violence to seek asylum that reminds us that we ought to stand up for other people fleeing violence to seek asylum. But I think there's another aspect of this story that doesn't really get near as much discussion, and that's a warning to those in power to not desire power above everything else. There's a lot of places where this shows up in the Bible, and we see it in our world all the time. We see it when politicians care more about getting reelected than actually doing any work. We see it when businesses lobby politicians to help the business and often hurt the average person. But far too often it also shows up in churches. Christianity in America, if you've paid any attention to statistics or even looked around you and over the past 20 years or so in church, has been declining, especially in mainline denominations like ours. The church isn't holding the same kind of power that it used to. And in a lot of ways, the church as a whole has been going to some very questionable lengths to hold down to the power that it once had. A concerning number of pastors want to repeal something called the Johnson Amendment, which it's a piece of legislation that prohibits churches from making political endorsements or political contributions. Churches across the denominational spectrum have been covering up abuse by clergy and other employees in the name of holding on to power. And if it isn't careful, the church, by trying to hold on to its power, could easily go the same way as King Herod. But the solution is very easy, and we have the solution to it in this same passage. Because above everything else, our goal as a church should be to worship God. We see this in the example of the Magi, who honor God with their gifts, and God protects them from Herod. We see it in Joseph, who not only trusts the dream that God sent him about Jesus' birth, but trusts the dream to go to Egypt and then come back from Egypt when it's safe. We also see it in the parts of Epiphany that are about justice, because having seen the light of God revealed in Jesus, having gathered together to worship him, it strengthens us to use the power that we have, not to build ourselves up, but to reach out to those who need help, to stand up for the innocent, to stand up for those who need safety. And in doing so, we proclaim to the world who Jesus really is. Not the baby that everyone likes on Easter, because babies are frightening beyond all imagination, but relatively tame. Babies can't get into too much trouble. And most of all, babies can't challenge us. They can't push us. Babies can't say to us, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Babies can't say to us, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, for they will be filled." But when we show what Jesus is about showing who he is, and we worship who he is, then we have a kind of power that we will never lose, because it's God's power in us. And when we see things in the world that are not right, when we see things in the world, even as we just go about our daily lives, we find those opportunities to be Christ to people in need, to be the helping hand when we're driving home from church and someone's stuck in a side of a road. On days like today, that's a very concrete way that we can be Christ to someone in need. Just a little push. Or as simple as helping someone when their bag breaks at the grocery store. It's those little ways that we can show who God is, and it's in the big ways. When we stand for injustice, when it takes more than just one of us to do it. Because all of those ways are ways to show God's power in our daily lives. And it's a way to show power the way that Jesus showed his power. And it's through worship, through service. That's when Jesus is revealed. Not as a baby in a manger, but the life he lived, the death he died, and the resurrection he had. Because that is what it's all about. It makes me wonder if we had been better as a church across the country at being Christ, if we would be losing power like we are. But because we tried to use our power for ourselves, maybe we deserved to lose it for a time. Because we don't want to be like Herod, so concerned about holding on to what we have. Instead, we should be like the Magi, to be willing to make a trip to worship God, whether that trip is just around the corner or across the country, but to give what we have. To give what we have to God, to give what we have in service, and thus gain something, thus gain what God has for us. That is Jesus' mission on earth, and therefore it's our mission to worship, to serve, and to love.